really was like so genuine, and he didn't let on to it a lot, but he always felt a lot deeper than he expressed. Everyone in my family knows that.
A few moments in your life that I feel like alter your brain chemistry, and I definitely feel like calling siblings that a sibling had definitely alters your brain chemistry.
Hey friends, it's Katie from Without a Crystal Ball. Welcome back to my channel, May 6th. Are you guys my besties on May 6th? I hope so. So yesterday we discussed Kody and Robin's response to the passing of Garrison Brown, and many of you had a lot to say in the comments, and we actually didn't cover everything that happened in the episode. So in this video, I want to just touch on a couple pieces of information that were gleaned from this video, from this most recent episode of Sister Wives. And I want to talk to you about some of the ramifications of being a family that is public, that has a reality show that uses their conflict and their family drama to create ratings and revenue, and have contracts with TLC, and what the fallout is for the kids that end up being sort of the collateral damage. When you're a child and you are, not even 10 years old, and your family makes a decision to go on reality television and make you the face of an illegal lifestyle, try to imagine what kind of ramifications that might have for you in your future. Imagine being 8 or 10 years old and your dad decides that he is going to use his family to become the public face of polygamy. This is a illegal culture. It's an illegal crime. It's a felony. It's a felony in all the states except for Utah now, but even still, it's a felony in Utah under certain circumstances. And it's a felony under the federal government. The reason why is because it involves the exploitation and the trafficking of women into relationships with men, and the women are used as currency and in chattel. Basically, they're traded between men, bartered, sometimes gifted. And the more men or the more women that the men have, the higher up they get in their leadership. And what happens to the women is that they are often neglected. They are used for the purpose of only creating children, and they're having children so they can increase the size of the cult. And Mormon fundamentalism is the largest subset of polygamous organizations or polygamous culture in the United States. And it's illegal and it's harmful. And it's deemed harmful by the World Health Organization, by the UN, Amnesty International, all these organizations that are looking at the civil rights and the harm caused by polygamy have stated that it's not a good system for women or for children. And even for some of the men that become adults who get shunned and kicked out. So imagine you're a child and your family makes the decision that they're going to throw out the privacy and they're going to throw out living in the shadow, and they're going to make you become a face of an illegal lifestyle, a criminal lifestyle. Because not only is polygamy a felony, but there's a lot of criminal activity that happens in these cults that we've seen that happens all over the internet. We hear stories all the time about these men that get arrested for SA, for tax fraud, welfare fraud, labor trafficking, and the most famous, obviously, is Warren Jeffs, who's still in federal prison. And then imagine that you are a child that's thrust out of your home in Utah. Your parents mislead you and tell you that your dad was going to get arrested for being a polygamist, which was never going to happen. Your dad then sues the state of Utah in federal court. He tries to get polygamy overturned. He becomes an advocate to try to make polygamy decriminalized, but he doesn't want to make polygamy legal, you guys. He only wanted it decriminalized because making it legal would mean that the women would get their rights. Women would be able to get multiple marriage licenses. They would have the same access and equity to rights. The children would theoretically have to have child support. The dads would no longer be able to abuse the welfare system. They would also, be forced to be on the birth certificates because they would be married. And they didn't want it legalized. They want it decriminalized because they don't want to go to jail, but they also still want to have the access to the exploitation side of how they game the system. So you're a child, your dad becomes the face, your moms become the face, and your moms are doing it, but they're doing it reluctantly because the women in this case have been brainwashed since the time they were born that they have to do this for the purpose of getting into heaven. And there's no way for them to get to heaven unless they marry a man that has multiple wives. So if you were a woman, you wouldn't do this unless you knew that you had a chance to get to the celestial kingdom. It's the only way you could con a woman into doing this. And often the only way you're going to get a woman to do this is by indoctrinating them from birth and then telling them from their childhood that they should become a polygamist or a plural wife. And the show became a phenomenon, and it was very detrimental to victims of polygamy because it made those victims that were actually getting harmed in polygamy, it made it harder for them to get justice. It made it harder for other victims from the cult that the Browns came from to be taken seriously in court. Some of Kody's friends got away with really crappy crap. Let's just say Kyle Henderson is one. And there's been a lot of cover up of what the actual cult that they came from was involved in. There's been a lot of information that was never disclosed. And over the years, lots of that information has leaked out. We know that Christine's grandfather was murdered. He didn't just die. He was murdered by Ervil LeBaron's group. Her grandpa didn't just go to prison for polygamy. He and his friends were involved in trafficking of young children, and her grandfather had taken children as wives, 13, 14-year-olds. So there is a lot that's been left underneath that they still to this day don't talk about. They also don't talk about the fraud committed by Owen Allred. They don't talk about the brethren from their church that have gone to prison for SA of children. And they've spent a lot of time trying to deflect that the AUB is not like the rest of the groups, even though they are. So that's the framework that you're having these kids become public. One is to intentionally mislead the public about who the AUB are. Two, to try to get this decriminalized. And three, because your dad's an egomaniac and he wants to be famous. And then once he does that, the only way that TLC will pick up your show is if your dad takes on a new wife. And McKelty revealed this, and McKelty will deny. At the same time, she will admit this, but then also deny that Robin came into the family for the purpose of the show. So basically, she'll say, no, my dad was already dating someone before we got the show. He wasn't, though. And the only way they would greenlight the show into a series is if it followed the journey of my dad adding a new wife. Now, Robin was already there, they say. But was she? Because Kody's first introduction really to the mainstream media was around 2008 when he did a interview with the BBC with him and Christine, and they went to his house. And at that time, there was no Robin. And it was that interview with the BBC, and along with Christine's work with Principal Voices, which was an advocacy group for making polygamy normal, led by other women that are from polygamy. And they said, yeah, Christine's family should be on the show. The problem was they didn't really have that much going on in their family. They had been together for a long time, and they were really interested in pursuing what it was like to add a wife. So in comes Robin. That's the truth. And from that point on, your entire life becomes public fodder. Everything that happens with your dad, the births of new siblings, your dad's quote unquote sham investigation, where he was never under the threat of being investigated or going to jail in the state of Utah. If he were, why then would TLC have launched My Five Wives, which was from the same cult? And you're moving around constantly because your dad is running from the law because it's a felony to be in this lifestyle. And it's a felony because there's coercion here where the dads or the patriarchs are full control over the women. The women have no legal rights. And there's a lot of manipulation, and there's a lot of doctrine that's used to keep the women compliant. And the women are taught to keep sweet and to be amiable and to talk like robots and say that they don't have feelings. And they're also taught they're not supposed to have feelings. And so you grow up as a child, not only on the show, but as a face of a criminal life. And then you're supposed to have sort of a normal childhood within that, even though your family's on television. Oh, and by the way, some of your darkest and hardest moments are filmed for entertainment for television. And as your parents get older and they get more money and more wealth, they start fighting about money, they start fighting about time, and your dad checks out and decides he just wants to spend all of his time with his youngest wife that's 11 or 12 years younger than him. And so not only does your dad abandon you, but then your dad takes the wealth that he's getting from the show and he doesn't allocate it across the board. He gives it all to his new wife. And then you watch your dad have these relationships with his new wife's children, who, by the way, he later adopts when you were never actually a legitimate child for him. And then he moves in with her and he abandons you and he abandons your moms. And then your moms are there to have to pick up the pieces and then all the while pretend on television that they're in a family and they all love each other. Couldn't be further from the truth, all while omitting all of the truth about the family. And then in the middle of that, at the very end, your dad gives up and he starts pushing out all of the wives. Or in polygamy world, it's called putting the ladies out to pasture, because once a woman stops having children, she is no longer deemed needed to the man, because the man's purpose is to populate the world with white babies for his kingdom. And if the women can't give him babies, they're out to pasture like an old cow. I think Owen Allred said that once over the pulpit. So Kody put his wives out to pasture, and they were supposed to just be like all the other polygamist wives that just didn't complain and they dealt with it. Except his wives got exposed to the real world and they figured things out. Now, one of his wives, Janelle, came from the LDS mainstream faith, but the LDS faith and the fundamentalist faith, they share a lot of the same doctrine. And so most people that convert into the FLDS actually come from the LDS because of that shared doctrine. Now, people in the LDS church get really mad if you tell them that they use the same books and they use the same doctrines, but it's the truth. And even though the public church has denounced polygamy for more than 100 years, it doesn't mean that polygamists and LDS people don't intermingle all the time. And Janelle converted because she already had that base of the LDS faith. It wasn't a hard conversion, because when you go into the history of the LDS church, you learn that all of the leaders were polygamists. And to really practice the faith the way it was meant to be practiced, you're supposed to do it like Joseph Smith, who was a fraud. So that's your childhood, okay? And then once your parents split up, you're an adult, a young adult, that is. But you're just getting starting out, and your mom is attached and she wants to make sure to help you and she's not going to kick you out. And like a lot of loving children, a lot of loving mothers, they help their kids, they let their college kids live with them. But then your dad decides that he is going to use the conflict with you as his entertainment for the dramatics of a show. And so because he wants to make ratings for a show, you become his target, you become his enemy. You're blamed for ruining his marriage with his wife. You're blamed for getting in the middle of the marriage. Your mom is blamed for taking your side. You are called a narcissist. You are called a jerk. Your dad says he doesn't want to talk to you anymore. Your stepmom calls you unsafe. Your stepmom pits your dad against you and makes your dad believe that you're evil and wicked and vile because you're out in the real world. And then underlaying all of that is that you are drinking alcohol, which is against their religion, even though they all drink. And your stepmother believes that that's evil and wicked, even though now she drinks on the show. And so because your stepmother and your dad decide you are unsafe, even though you're not, even though most of your siblings drink, but you're becoming the target of your dad's hostility. Your dad makes your conflict with him a storyline for the show, and he ignores the conflicts he has with other children, like your brother Dayton, who's having equally the same problems with your dad, but your dad protects that conflict with Dayton, and he instead takes all of his anger and angst out on you. And you're forced to come on to a show that you probably don't want to be involved in because you're in the National Guard, you're trying to start your own life, you don't want to be affiliated with polygamy, and in fact, you abandon the faith and at one point joined the actual mainstream church, disavowing your family's beliefs. and rejecting it by becoming mainstream LDS. Nobody on the show ever discusses that you actually become LDS. They only make it seem like every child that tries to become LDS is rejected by the church. So that's your life. And then your dad rejects you. He's bullying you for 3-4 seasons, making you seem like you are the Antichrist and evil. And you're going to get everyone infected and going to kill everyone because you like to go out and have to work a job. Meanwhile, your dad gets COVID from your adopted sister and he never blames her. And then finally, after years and years and years of fighting, you give up and you say to your dad and to Robin, you can have him. We don't need a dad anymore. We're grown adults. But it's not true, because even until your dying day, you still wanted that relationship with your dad. But your dad used your trauma and he made you the scapegoat, and he deflected his bad behavior onto you, and he projected all of his negative behavior onto you. He made you believe you were the bad one, even though your dad was the bad one. And you've been on a show like this since you've been 10, the face of a criminal life, forced to try to assimilate into that world, not manage getting bullied in school, somehow find a way to get into the mainstream church, manage to graduate from high school, join the National Guard, and have a pretty successful, seamless transition into life without any problem until you end up dying by unaliving. And all the while, you're struggling. Your family is still filming a show, and their whole drama keeps unfolding before the masses. And it's under this framework why some people that watch the show have a very hard time with the continuation of Sister Wives. Because underneath this, there's a story about the children that are being lost in the mix, whether we want to believe it or not. And there's stories about the kids that didn't ask to be public. Their lives were not asked to be a part of a show. Their conflicts with their parents were not asked to be involved. And their mom and dad, both of them, decided to film the conflict about you guys. Now, your mom defended you, but she still filmed it. And it was probably hard on everyone involved. And then once you passed away, many people believed that your parents would see this as like that sign that you guys, this has gone too far. And because your last text messages are to crew members and people from the show, and you're saying, I want to hate you, but I can't. I miss those days. I miss the good times, something to that effect. And your dad then goes on to a show after you die and says, I didn't have a chance to say anything, but you texted your dad the very night that you died, and your dad didn't respond. He could have, but he didn't. And they'll never tell you that on the show, or that your friends want the show to be canceled because they know it hurt you. And there's still family members that hate people like me that don't want to cover up the harms of polygamy and just want the truth to be known. That's the framework of what this entire new part of Sister Wives is under, okay? And what we saw on the episode was honesty from Janelle to a degree. She spoke openly about his problem with alcohol. She spoke openly about the suicide, which was very hard.
I knew he was struggling, and I always just picked up the phone, and I always make it a point to just talk to him. And it wasn't really about anything. Like, it was just, I think he needed the connection. I knew he'd been drinking again. He would go through periods where he was really good, and then he just would have a binge, just as part of the cycle, I think. Gabriel called me, and he's like, Mom, he's gone. And I'm like, what?
Having that conversation in a public way could help someone, but also it could really help other people in polygamy if you also spoke about how polygamy and being public polygamists and the show contributed to the mental illness within the family. And I don't want to say that it was just Garrison, because I think Garrison's just a symptom here of a bigger problem. And I'm glad they're starting to talk about mental health, because that is what they've been saying. But they also, because they come from Mormon fundamentalism, do not believe in medications for depression or anxiety. They also have a hard time dealing with and working with psychiatrists, because their doctrine and their people tell them not to go to the psychologists or go to the psychiatrists. And a lot of it is you're taught that the mental illness is some sort of weakness in you that you need to overcome. And on the episode that aired, you saw several of the people speak openly and say that he died by suicide. Robin didn't say it. She wouldn't say it because there's also an underlying belief within your culture that if you die this way, you are no different than someone that takes a life. And so there's shame. And then your father, who was absent for all of those years and had banded you and bullied you and all of those things, that didn't help your mental health. And you started drinking during the same period that your dad started bullying you and spiraling into harder and more sadness, and your family splits up and your dad's bullying you on the show and you're drinking more.
He really struggled with alcohol. I don't know what happened. He was never a drinking kid. He didn't like it, didn't like the taste of it, and he started to drink during COVID. Something happened in this last year, and it really just got him. We had offered him all the love, all the support, all the help, all the resources. It wasn't that he didn't have those things. Like, I don't know. I don't know what happened that this night he did that.
And you're trying to cope, and your family knows that you're dealing with anxiety and you're dealing with depression, and you're probably not the only one in the family going through this. And the whole time they keep filming. And that's why a lot of people stopped watching the show. And if you were one of those people, I understand. I understand. Covering this show is not fun for me. Covering the story, I hate it because there's no way that to speak about this in a way that is truly super sensitive to what happened, but also transparent enough so that people know that what happened to Garrison happens to a lot of young men in polygamy and a lot of young women because of the lack of understanding about psychiatric medications and the brainwashing they go through about not going to doctors, not going to psychiatrists, not going to psychologists, even though they do some kinds of therapy, they do like family therapy that is more like relational. They don't often do therapy that has to do with mental health. It's usually like, I'm having a problem in a marriage. So they go to marriage counseling, which is vastly different than if you go to cognitive behavioral therapy, EDMR, or all the different kinds of therapies you can do with a psychologist or psychiatrist. And because they also have stigmas about taking medications, and then you're also in the military, there's probably a dance there too about feeling like if you take care of it, or acknowledge it, you're being weak. And so alcohol becomes a coping mechanism, but because you grew up in a cult, you were never taught about moderation. And so you're told your whole life that if you drink, you're going to go to hell. So you might as well just keep drinking because if you're going to do once, you might as well go all in. And that's another problem that happens in polygamy. A lot of people that leave end up, especially young men, abusing alcohol and drugs. And then they have the trauma of being shunned by their fathers, being neglected as a child, being forced to deal with poverty, which all of them did before the show. And then you add the layer of putting this all on TV, and it was a recipe for disaster. I just hope that as you continue, if you do watch, that you look at this as a cautionary tale of what can happen when something might have started for the right reasons, at least in their eyes, can morph into something evil, twisted, and greedy. Because while they're all fighting about money and who gets what and all of these things from the divorce, we're supposed to believe that these kids are just somehow totally okay with no scathing, no bumps. And how many times did we hear for years Janelle say, my kids are great, everything's fine, everything's going great. But then privately, we now know that he was struggling for years. The entire time he was being bullied by his dad, she now says he was struggling. So were they really great? No. Is Gabriel great today? No. Are any of these kids great? No. They all have trauma. And now this trauma is going to become a part of the show. I spoke to 2 former members of the AUB yesterday. One of them, you see in my comments, her member name is Ellen. And another one is Ellen is a pseudonym. That's not her real name. She doesn't want to be publicly identified. And then Kristen Decker is Christine's aunt and a former member of the cult too. And I asked them why, after everything that Kody put that child through, why did he get a say in where his son was buried? He was estranged, and Garrison was an adult. And my belief is that If you are not a part of someone's life while they're alive, you shouldn't be able to have a say in what happens to them after they're dead. If you're part of an estranged family, you will understand I'm estranged from my biological parents, and I would not want them to have any say in my funeral if I were to die today. So, having him have a say when there's an estrangement feels disgusting to me because I look at this whole system as a cause. And then he's also playing the victim and the martyr and the hero, right? Because I'm going to put him in the ground. And so I asked them, why would he get a say? And it's simple because in the fundamentalist beliefs, even though they all are not part of the belief, the indoctrination runs deep and Kody still is the head of the house. And even though Janelle and Kody are separated and they don't live together, they are not spiritually divorced. And because she still holds on to her faith and she still holds on to her belief and she's not gone through that spiritual divorce, currently she believes that she is still married to Kody spiritually. And she also believes that if she has to get to heaven and she wants to see him again, Garrison that is, she needs to stay married to Kody. But in order to stay married to Kody, that means that she does not get to date anymore. She has to stay single for the rest of her life. So Janelle deferred to Kody because he's the head of the house, even though they're not married. Under their faith, he's the priesthood authority, even though they're not a part of it, but it's indoctrinated in them, and the men take over regardless if they have any relationship with the child. And then Kristen told me that the cremation is not something that they do in the LDS often. More often than not, they would prefer a burial. And so cremation is looked down upon. And so even though Janelle said that this was what Garrison wanted and they agreed that they would do it, she said, Kody and I agreed. I suspect the reason why Kody wants to bury him is because of the belief system that they need to be buried. Now, whether or not he got the full ashes is a whole other part. I did ask someone else who's had a stepfather die and had some of their sister moms or whatever, Ellen, who grew up with, I think, 3 or 4, I can't remember, 2 or 3 moms, 3 moms. When I think one of them died, they spread the ashes among many of the siblings, and so each sibling and some of the adults had parts of the ashes. And so Ellen said, well, maybe Kody only has a part of the ashes, not all of the ashes. Maybe Janelle has some, maybe some of his siblings have some, and he's getting a part of the ashes, and those are the ashes that are going to be buried. I don't know. You can bury an urn. That's something you can do. And you can do that at a cemetery, which is where he's buried. That urn is buried in Wyoming. So despite that, Janelle on the show is living in a different state, not claiming to be married, knowing that Mary has encouraged her to get a spiritual lease. To my understanding, that hasn't happened. If it has, I hope it has. If she needs one, she shouldn't have to need one, but she yesterday posted on her Instagram that she still has her faith. So she still believes this, which means she still believes she is tied to Kody. And she believes that to stay tied to Kody means she will see Garrison. So now it almost seems like she may not disconnect from Kody because she wants to see Garrison on the other side. I hope at some point she realizes that if there is this heaven that she's hoping there is, that she doesn't need to stay in a loveless marriage, even if they don't live together and they live in separate states. She doesn't need to be psychologically tied to someone that doesn't deserve to be tied to her in any capacity. And under this whole backdrop of this whole long video I've just shared with you, the most shocking detail that's being left out of all of this is a truth that TLC will never admit, ever. But on the night that Garrison died, Tim Gibbons had texted a photograph to a group chat. Tim Gibbons was the producer of the show, and he was on the show from the very beginning. He's the one that pitched the show to the family. He's the one that sought out the Browns. He was with them through all of it. He was going to prove everyone wrong, that polygamy wasn't like what they said it was in the documentaries. And there was not harm to children. There was not harm to women. It was all consensual. He was going to prove them wrong. And on that final night, Tim sent a text message of a photograph of them playing paintball at Caleb's bachelor party when he married Maddie. And Garrison responded to that and responded directly to the photograph that Tim had sent. And that text message directed directly at Tim said, I want to hate you for sharing the good times, but I can't. I miss these days. That was to Tim Gibbons, on the text message that were obtained through an FOIA via the Flagstaff police that I obtained. It is clear as day that he was talking to Tim, and Janelle contacted him because she was alerted by what he had sent to someone that they work with and was concerned about what he had said to somebody that they worked with, concerned about their jobs and concerned about their livelihood, and also concerned about Garrison. She reached out to him, and he told his mother that he saw the picture once it was texted to him. He thought it was a newer picture, and then he realized it was an older picture and he got sad. His last moments of his life were thinking about the fact that he wanted to hate Tim Gibbons for what Tim brought into their lives. But at the same time he wants to hate him, Tim also brought in opportunities they never would have had. Tim exploited a family that was poor, that was living in poverty, and that kids were being and dealing with food insecurity. And when Tim came in and they became wealthy, and Tim became wealthy, they got to do things and go on trips, and they didn't have to worry about where the next where the next food was going to come from, where their next meal was going to come from. They didn't have to worry about the hand-me-downs, the worn out shoes, the no food in the cupboards. How are we going to pay the electricity bill? They had to stop. They didn't have to declare bankruptcy all the time. Many of them got off welfare, even though they were on welfare into like the 5th or 6th season. But his last night, his last text related to Sister Wives was telling the producer of the show he wanted to hate him. And TLC will never tell you that. TLC will never admit that he told Tim Gibbons, I want to hate you, but I can't. I want to hate you for sharing the good times, but I can't. I miss these days. Tim shared moments with them, right? With the family. And by sharing those moments, it meant that it was on TV. March 4th was the night that he died. He was found on March 5th in the morning. And Garrison had just gotten over the hardest season ever of Sister Wives that went until the end of January into early February. And that entire time, Kody was berating him, abusing him verbally, mentally, psychologically, to a national audience of millions of people. And his final text, I want to hate you for sharing the good times, but I can't. I miss these days, the days when it was fun, not these days today. And they knew and they know that that text message was sent to Tim. Janelle knows because she told the police. Kody knows because he was included on the text. Christine knows because she was included on the text. Robin would know because Dayton's included on the text. Logan knows because he was on the text. They know. And then abruptly, they paused filming for a little bit. They picked up filming not long after. That's what we're seeing right now. Kody went on to film and reclaim and reframe the narrative. But you know what happened? Tim quit. He left the show, and they had to bring in a new producer to film. They had to bring in a new producer to do the talking heads. So almost all of the talking heads that you've seen even before this week were filmed after Garrison died. Almost all of them. And they were filmed by a new producer because Tim quit. Tim quit the show after Garrison died and after he got that text message. But the show went on. Christopher Poole took over. Tim handed over Puddle Monkey to Christopher Poole. Tim moved to Connecticut. The story of the family is, he got a different house. He moved. He needed a break from all of this. It's a really coincidental time to need a break. So the producer that brought you into this limelight and made the show and directed the show for all of these seasons quit after getting your text message about you hating him. Then you die. He quits. Your parents keep filming, but he quits because TLC needs to make a show. And they will never tell you that. So that's what's being left out on the cutting room floor. And if it angers you that I'm sharing that, I'm sorry. I don't want to burst your bubble, but there's damage here that shouldn't be overlooked. And I'm just going to make sure that it's out there because Garrison's voice, regardless of if the family hates me, and I know that they do, the truth deserves to be heard, and that the show is a root cause of the problem and the conflict, and they keep filming. So tell me what your thoughts are about this. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up. Make sure to subscribe to my channel if you haven't subscribed, and click the bell so you never miss a video. Thanks so much for watching. Bye, guys.